Yes, I'm ready. Okay, welcome everyone to the Finance Committee meeting for April 19th, 2023. It is about 6:30 p.m. Roll call, Amber.
Mayor St. John,
Here.
Mrs. Cooper, here. Mr. Martin,
Here.
Mr. Capel,
Here.
Mr. Ghost,
Here.
Mr. Grumney,
Here.
Mr. Neff,
Here.
all present.
Thank you. Okay, minutes from our last meeting. Any additions, corrections, motion for approval? This was from March 15th, 2023.
Motion to approve.
Motion to approve by Mr. Martin,
Second.
second by Mr. Neff. Any other further discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
Mrs.
Oh.
Cooper,
Excuse me, I do have to abstain. I was not here. Sorry.
and Mr. Grumney.
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Motion passed. Motion for the minutes passed. Let's go to new business. We have the Montrose Group here with us this evening. Mr. Nate Green is here to share some information on a consulting agreement.
So if I could just a couple of words of introduction. So what we're doing this evening, you may recall that maybe 4 or 5 months ago, we had identified some projects where we wanted to engage a third-party professional. This is one of the projects that we had talked about, augmenting the city staff with professional services around economic development. So over the course of the last couple of months, we've been working with the Montrose Group to develop a scope of work. So what you have in the packet is the engagement agreement. Nate's going to talk a little bit more about that. So we've invited Nate Green. He's a partner and the managing director for the economic development team over at Montrose. Talk a little bit more about who they are and what the proposed scope of work is. And then we'll talk just a little bit about next steps after that. Nate.
All right, great. Well, thank you all very much for having me here this evening. My name is Nate Green, as Daryl said. I'm the managing director of economic development for the Montrose Group. I'll give you a little background on myself, and then we'll talk about the Montrose Group and get into the engagement. And then feel free to, and I'll answer any questions. You can also just yell at me, and I'll answer questions, as we go along. I've been in economic development for over 20 years. I was at the Ohio Department of Development twice. I started my career there with Mr. Hennessy. Many years ago. We were very young back then. He was in charge of all the job creation tax credits, and I had to go in and negotiate. And he was a hard negotiator. He wouldn't just let me get away with stuff.
Good, I like to hear that.
Exactly. But I started my career in economic development, the Ohio Department of Development. I left there and worked in Cleveland for 2 years as the working for the Port Authority in Cleveland. I came back to Central Ohio and was the development director for Pickaway County and its municipalities of Circleville and Asheville. I did that for 5.5 years, and then I went back to the state and I worked for the Ohio Department of Development again. I was the director of the Strategic Business Investment Division, which was the division that we worked in, that Daryl and I both worked in previously. And then I had the great opportunity to go help start Jobs Ohio. That was part of our role when I was there. When I was brought in, was to go help start Jobs Ohio. So I did that. Left there. I had a short stint in investment banking. I did that for a little over a year. I didn't like investment banking, so I got out of that. And Dave Robinson, who's our founding partner, asked me to come join the Montrose Group. So I've been at the Montrose Group for the last 8 years. The Montrose Group, we are a Columbus-based economic development and government relations firm. There are 5 of us that are at the Montrose Group. 3 of the 5, including myself, are dedicated to economic development. The other 2, Dave kind of gets involved in everything. And then we have one guy, Tim Bigham, who all he does is government relations at the State House. So I don't want to go to the State House. I have no interest in that. So it's good. It's good that he does that. Our economic development work is in a couple different areas. One is exactly what we're talking about here, doing economic development advice, being an advisor to communities for economic development work. We also do economic development strategic planning, and we'll talk a little bit about some of that when I get into the scope. We've done, gosh, I think we've done 40 different economic development plans across the state of Ohio and really across the Midwest over the last 8 years since I joined and started with Dave. We also represent, we have a private sector side of our business where we do work with big industrial developers, big residential developers, multifamily, mixed use developers. We also do work with companies to help them with economic development incentives. I think the value in that and the value that we bring to all of you is that we see things from both sides. We know what the public sector, what is going on from incentives and what governments, counties, cities, municipalities want to see, but we also see, because of our private sector work, what is happening in the market, what's happening in the economy, what's happening with finance, and how that impacts what happens with cities. And then, as I said, the last part of our business is government relations, which is at the State House, and we do that. What we have proposed for all of you is the advisor work, economic development advisor and consultation work. And that's been, you know, we met, Mayor, we met at the BIA and we talked a little bit about that. And then we've been talking with Daryl since then about that. It kind of goes, if you look into our engagement letter, I think there's 4 different buckets. The first one is really just general economic development consulting for all of you. You don't have an economic development staff. Certainly Daryl is very adept at economic development. He's made a career in economic development and in city municipal administration. So he has a good feel for that, but he's also, as you all know, managing the city. So he can't be involved in economic development every day. So we would work with the administration, but also all of you on economic development projects and just provide what I'll call general economic development advice. What does that mean? That means that you have a developer that comes in that wants to build whatever they want to build. They want to build homes, or they want to build some kind of office space or retail, and they want to engage with you on some kind of economic development incentive, whether that be a public finance tool like a TIF, tax increment finance district, or a new community authority, or they want some kind of tax abatement. We will work with all of you to figure out what's the best, what is in the best interest of Sunbury to get that project done, to get the capital investment to happen, maybe to incentivize jobs and get all that to happen here. That is really the kind of the overarching kind of day-to-day things we'll help you with. The second thing that's on here, and this is what we'll really start with, is economic development benchmarking and priority setting. We understand you don't have an economic development strategic plan in place, so we're not going to do a full plan. But what we're going to do is work with all of you through listening sessions, work with some of maybe your business owners as well, to find out first off what your priorities are around economic development, how you feel about the tools that you have in place today. And then take that and say, okay, who are your competitor communities? Who do you compete with for business and for capital investment? And then who are some of the communities in Ohio that are best in class that you should look at and say, what are they doing that we can steal from? I'm sorry, that you can borrow. It's not that you can borrow. But we want to look at that and really, I think it's, for us, because we do work around the state of Ohio, we can offer you really a lens into that and say, okay, here's what's happening outside of Sunbury. How can we bring that here? And how do the tools that you have in place today, how are we using those today? And how can we enhance those or change those so they work better? And then we line that up with those listening sessions and say, okay, here's what you want. How do we move forward and figure out what programs we should be using for all of you? So that's really the first phase of what we will do, and we'll jump into that. And that will actually be a report that will come to you. So you'll see that it'll be a benchmark report. We'll work with Daryl on that, and then we'll deliver that to all of you so that you understand it and can kind of get into it, and then figure out what we'll put recommendations in there for what we think should be done next. The third thing on this list is it kind of goes hand in hand with number one, but economic development agreement review, incentive analysis, impact analysis, and modeling. One of the things that we think is important when you're asked to do a TIF, or you're asked to do an NCA, or asked to do a tax abatement agreement, you want to make sure that it's in the best financial interest. I mean, it's got to be in the best interest of the community, but also the best financial interest of Sunbury. So we will work with all of you and figure out what the economic impact is of those developments that are coming to you. What the economic impact is of doing a TIF or doing an NCA. We'll also just we'll compare and run some models, financial models for what a TIF might generate, what an NCA might generate, and how that's going to impact you, how that can fund infrastructure, all those kind of things. We do that all the time. We do it for the communities we work with. We also do it for developers. So we'll do that and help you kind of get through that and figure out, okay, does this make sense or does it not? We'll also make recommendations for you around that and how those deals work. And the last thing on here, and this is something I think is a little bit, kind of further out, but it's certainly something that you might want to consider, is putting a community improvement corporation in place, a CIC, for Sunbury. We will look and study that, figure out if that makes sense for you all to have a CIC. Community improvement corporations in communities, wherever they are in Ohio. The CICs in Ohio that came into law in, I believe, 1956, 1954, somewhere like that, somewhere around that. I don't know how many there are in Ohio, but there are a lot. And when they were first put in place, they were put in place for industrial development projects. The communities used them to issue industrial revenue bonds, and they were tax exempt bonds. The community that worked in the Circle, that's all they did for 30 years until I got there, and then we did some other things. But what they've become, what CICs have become, is the economic development arm of a community. And what you can do with those is put a mix between public sector and private sector on there, so you get kind of a lot of good ideas of how you do development. A lot of CICs are put in place to purchase properties, to put properties, convey properties that the community owns, that have economic development value. I just happen to be the chair right now of the CIC where I live. I live in Bexley, and I'm the chair of that. I've been on that CIC for 12 years. That's exactly what our CIC does. In Bexley, we've bought properties that are in corridors that the city has decided they want to pursue, and we buy those properties, we manage them, and then we sell them at some point. But my whole point of that is that we will look at that and see if that's something that makes sense here, because you don't have one here. It might be something as you continue to grow that you want to do. You want to protect assets, and you want to figure out how where you want to see kind of economic development value place. So with that, that's kind of our general scope. I will turn it over to Mr. Hennessy. It looks like he's ready to talk. So turn over that, and we'll go for questions.
So I'll just make a couple of follow-up comments. So the cost of the engagement, $4,000 a month. I think we've written it as a one-year agreement with renewable options thereafter. We are going to ask council to consider this later this evening if you're comfortable with this engagement. I will remind you that we are also in the midst of we're in the midst of developing the district level plan on the west side of Columbus, or the west side of Sunbury. And we certainly would envision that, some of those parcels will have an economic development bent associated with them. So in getting a professional services organization in place to assist us with that will certainly be key. And then I think this also helps us accomplish a priority that's been mentioned, I think, multiple times. We do need to diversify our tax base. And I think with a little bit more, again, professional engagement, it helps us do that. So that's what we've got. If you've got questions for Nate or for me, or about what happens next, I guess we're ready to answer those.
Yes.
Couple of questions for you. Thanks, Nate, by the way, for your presentation. To the bucket number 3, you would analyze TIF agreements and NCA agreements that are proposed. I do see here you would analyze existing agreements that we have in place. That's correct.
I didn't mention that, but that's exactly right. I skipped over it. I apologize, but that is something that we talked about. And that's something we will absolutely do.
Okay.
And we'll compare those to other communities as well to make sure that those are in line with what you want.
Very good. And then question on the compensation. It says in here, Montrose is not entitled to and shall not be paid any additional costs or expenses, et cetera. So there's no hidden fees or expenses or stuff like that we need to be worried about. It's $4,000 a month. That's it, right?
That's it. You send your bill, you pay it, and that's all you see.
Okay. That's regardless of how busy.
I mean, I might make Daryl buy me a cheeseburger or something, but other than that.
I do like cheeseburgers.
Turn it in a receipt though.
We won't. Yeah, what I was going to say though, I think one of the other things that we had talked about is trying to also establish a routine communication with the Montrose Group. So there will be regular communications, you know, just throughout the course of the year, not just project based, but also kind of this ongoing.
And it's actually mentioned that, Daryl, that is something that we do and will do. We will have calls most likely. When we start, they might be every week, but most likely will be every other week. And then we will put in place quarterly meetings that are in-person meetings. If we need more than that in person, we'll certainly do that, but we'll at least have that schedule so that we have regular communication with your administration. And that we also have regular, you know, sit down communication. We're here in the region, so that makes it easier. We may be here more often, but we will have set up that regular communication. That's a good point there.
Wanted to just mention a couple things. Do you have questions?
Yeah,
Go ahead.
Oh, I just real quick. So, yes, Nate, thank you again for your presentation. So would we get an actual economic strategic plan and created for us with this fee? Or is that an actual output, or is that something we would have to request, or how's that?
This wouldn't be we wouldn't do a full economic development strategic plan. It'll be more around what programs we think you should put in place in that second bucket, in that economic development benchmarking. We could do that certainly, but that'd be kind of over and above.
A step above, right?
Yeah.
Okay. And then my second question, sorry, this is a silly one, but when you're looking at businesses that come to Sunbury and say, hey, we're interested, and you do the financing evaluation, those other things, we also look at the type of company. Like, do we do a large value or large evaluation, say, okay, Sunbury is really missing based on what we already have in place.
Yep.
We need more commercial, we need more retail, we
Yep.
need more restaurants. Do you take a look at that and say, yeah, this fits, or you have a lot of this? I'm not sure.
We can do that as part of that benchmarking, kind of an industry cluster analysis and see. And that's something we've already talked about, because that economic diversity, that is something that you need, especially as a growing community. You don't want to have an overabundance of any one thing. So yes, that's something we'll look at.
We have the new interchange coming. There'll be a lot of businesses coming wanting to
Absolutely.
make sure we have a good balance of whether it's medical.
Yeah, it sounds like you got on the track list. And
Well, I was gonna say, that is one of the things we're actually getting through the district plan, is we're gonna do a deeper dive into the kind of the needs and the opportunities on the economic development side. And
Okay.
I think we'll just use that as part of our communication in terms of what we're looking to attract, or again, how to compete, that type of thing.
Absolutely.
And that brings up one, sorry to interrupt. So do you have a relationship with MS Consultants?
I would say that not really. I know them. We've worked with them. We haven't really partnered with them in the past, but we certainly, they're in the planning space just like us. I'm just trying to think of the last time I worked with somebody from MS, but it doesn't. I mean, regardless, that we can work with them when we will. It's not an issue.
Okay. All right. I'm going to go into philosophy, and then we'll get into some strategy and tactics. One of the burdens that you have as council members is really your community builder, and your focus is really on, not what's right tomorrow, but what's right, in 5 years, 10 years, 25 years. But we have, I've been trying to explain this to folks, like how much growth potential is actually like pent up right now. You can see it in property values, but right now is such a pivotal time. If you took the Chandler, Arizona Intel map, the time-lapse study, and look at the first 10 years, what happens in the first 10 years? We are in that ring of like the first 10 years of every single decision we make now matters more than it will. And it exponentially will affect the trajectory of like how Sunbury develops. We right now have significant development right on our doorstep, some of which you know about, some of which you don't. And we need help. And the reason I say that, and why I think this particular group, the Montrose Group, I mean, no offense, you're a boutique firm. I mean, what I mean
There's
is
no
like,
offense, we call ourselves that all the time. Mayor.
Okay.
They're excited for-
you're a boutique firm. I mean, you're a 5-person shop, right?
That's
Of specialists, like the mercenaries of economic development. Sorry, that's probably not. Squad.
Yeah, mercenaries, that's good. Like special forces, yeah.
Yes, special force, that's better. And, I had a really good meeting with, Nate, and then we had another sit down with, I forget her name, Jamie. And what I really liked about your model, and honestly, this is not a traditional way we've gone, is the retainer based. You're part of the team. You're meeting with us on a weekly, bi-weekly basis to provide feedback. And, you want to be a part of the team, kind of like what Joey Thomas is doing in the background right now. Like he's in the meetings and understanding the context and helping us make decisions. At your heart, the Montrose Group is a staff augmentation tool. You cannot hire anybody with economic development experience, let alone the hit squad of economic development for $48,000.
Right. I was going to mention that. Yeah, that's a very good point.
The reason this is so important right now, the other entities, we're all on the same side, the Big Walnut Local School District, Olentangy Local School District, the county, the state, we're all on the same team. However, with every single economic development package, including anything of scale, we are required to have agreements with those bodies. And what I mean by agreements is actually negotiations. When you're talking about splitting the pie on who's going to get what and who's going to pay for roads and who's going to pay for the fiber and who's going to own the maintenance long term, whether that's on the back of the private sector or the public sector, all of those decisions culminate with, does the right business, to John's point, or the right use, are we going to be able to attract folks who are going to be here with us for the long term? The Hitachi Astemos of 40 years ago that decided to plant and expand and now is our top taxpayer. How are we going to attract more of those types of businesses? And I don't mean industrial, fill in the blank with whatever you want. Apple, Google, whomever, you know what I mean? Bitcoin, I don't care who it is, Xbox, you fill it in, but how are we going to attract the biggest of big players that are going to plant, root, create high paying jobs for the long term? We need somebody like the Montrose Group. We need the Montrose Group to be able to be in our corner, help us develop plans when we're negotiating with other entities. That's the bottom line, including negotiating with the businesses and the developers. I have the burden now, and you do too, and you're going to be cursed with this, especially after I say it. Anytime you travel anywhere or drive any road, you're going to microanalyze how in the hell did they pay for this? Who thought of this? Drive through West Star, the New Albany Business Park, Easton Bridge Park, Rickenbacker Airport, Las Vegas, Nashville was just there over the past month. I mean, you think about what tools are actually at work here that make this a sustainable engine go? Because you can tell where it didn't go right, like Morse Road or 161 or Linden or Cleveland Avenue or a million other places, Georgesville Road. There's 50 examples where you can say this doesn't feel right and somebody didn't think it through. The ones that are thought through are the ones that, are like early cycle, mid cycle, or have been there, like Bexley, for example. There's been a lot of thought leadership that's gone into planning that out to the point where, truthfully, we don't have the capacity internally to go out and baseline other peer communities in Central Ohio and outside of Central Ohio to tell us what works, what doesn't work, and then also have the lens of the private sector. What is a business like? I'm throwing out a name, but it doesn't matter. Like Google, what are they actually looking for when they're looking to plant, Midwest headquarters? What are they looking for in terms of economic development incentives? And how can we potentially be in the game? And I'm telling you, we're in the game. Like you may not believe it. We are in the game right now because we are in such close proximity to Intel. We were in the game before that because we're in Delaware County, the healthiest, wealthiest, most prosperous county, fastest growing city in Ohio. And I'm probably beating this horse down to the ground, but I can't stress enough how important this particular development is for what we have right in front of us, knowing that the clock is not stopping.
Well, Mayor, it's hard to top that. So you'll have a chance to vote on this a little bit later at the council meeting. So, all right.
Are there any other questions for Nate?
All right, Mayor, that was awesome. Can you just record that and we can, split that out? That was really good. Taylor, Arizona, have you been to church?
No, but I've looked on Google Earth, same thing.
I've been there. We went there. We went out last February. Now, admittedly, I will tell you, we played golf while we were there, but it was February in Arizona. I'd rather be there. But we went and we didn't meet with Shannon, but we met with Gilbert. Not that you are either of those two places you want to be, but they had, before Intel was there, and in the 90s, they had 10,000 people there.
Mhm.
They have 250,000 people in both of those communities today. Now, there's a lot of reasons for that. Intel is just one of those. California has moved to Arizona. California has moved to Nevada. But the point is that they were ready. They're great playing communities, and they have really good partnerships with all of their private sector entities and their schools. So to your point, it is a great model because they've actually done some things really well. They need to figure out water, but they will because they've figured out a lot of other things. So I agree with you on that.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you all very much.
Thank you. Thanks, Mr. Mayor, for those comments. I would concur, especially on the cost of the group. I think it's probably half of what we would pay for an economic development director.
He's still on the route.
So.
Thank you.
Thank you. We'll see you, Nate. Okay, very good. Let's move on now. Let's see what time it is. We've got 30 minutes. Let's go. Dana's here. There she is down there. You got your financial reports in your packets. So we got the monthly report and the bank to book reconciliation. I talked to Dan just briefly a little while ago. Lots of rosy projections and expenses are under budget a little bit so far, and revenue is up. So big picture is good. So go ahead, Ms. Steppen.
Thank you. I'd like to start with page 12 in your packet to look at the revenues. And then talk a little about the revenues and where we're falling right now, and then discuss the expenses after that. On page 12, starting at the top, we have the first section of the general fund, and we are just slightly over budget on collections for revenue, which is great right now. The majority of what we've budgeted in the general fund is for income tax collections. And I have a breakdown of income tax back here on page 16. And this is what I'm going to start providing on a monthly basis for our committee meeting. This is a 10-year history, year-to-date collections by category, and it has all of the withholding, individual, and net profit income tax collections year-to-date through the current month. So right now, this is year-to-date through March, and we've collected a total of $987,646 in income tax revenue. And you can kind of see the trends if you look back throughout the 10 years of history, which I've provided, to see where we are increasing. The withholding tax has increased quite steadily over the past 10 years. Individual has it's not increased as much, but it's back in 2014, it was 163,000. Now we're at 224,000. And the net profit appears to be quite stagnant if we look back 10 years. So just some interesting data to provide so you can see some comparisons from income tax.
Yeah, I'm so sorry to interrupt, but so for reference, if we look at 2022, it was 845,000 this time last year.
Yes, that's correct.
So we're up 150,000 or so.
Yep.
Roughly.
Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay, and then back to page 12, looking at the general fund revenues. That 987,000, you can see that on the income tax line, third row from the top right there. And we've budgeted 3.9 million for the year. So we are just over 25%, 25.3% collected for the year. So we're trending slightly higher and hopefully continue to do so throughout the year. Nothing much to bring to your attention here on the revenue side. Impact fees are quite high. Basically, we've budgeted quite low for the impact fees for police in the municipal building, And also didn't budget anything for the Parks and Rec and, what was the third one? The roads impact fee. Thank you. So those are obviously, collecting higher than we budgeted.
Yeah, that's always a good thing. Yeah, we're gonna talk about the good news on the sewer tap.
Yes.
Can we hit on the impact fees real quick? Just two things. Number one, building permits are significantly up
Yes,
year over year. I want to say we're
33 residential taps so far.
Yeah, we
We
are.
budgeted 16 for the whole year, right?
Yeah, that was.
That's what it's at.
So I think we're double where we were this year last time. That's one component. The other piece I wanted to mention is, you may remember when we enacted the legislation for the impact fees, we did a gradual ramp up. And so I think it's July 1st, there's going to be another ramp. And then at the end of the year will be is the final ramp.
Full, yes.
Mhm.
So all I'm saying is that these are going to continue to increase significantly.
Yes, they are. Thank you. Down in the sewer fund, Fund 402 on page 13. We've budgeted 1.5 million in total revenues for that fund, and we are already at 776,000, collecting on just under 52% of that, just in the first 3 months. And primarily those are due to the new builds. Now, there is an anomaly there, the 152,000 that you see in the capital projects OWDA proceeds. That was actually a payment that should have gone to a vendor. So it's shown here as a revenue. It's an expense in April. So it's going to be a wash. So you can kind of ignore that number for now. Nothing else to highlight on the revenues. If we go back to the expenses, flipping backwards to page 7, I believe it is. 7 is where it starts. General fund is broken down by department here on page 7. Starting with the police department, street lighting, traffic signals, zoning, admin. The highlighted yellow is where the variance from budget is more than 10%, either plus or minus. So I've put little explanations and comments into all of those where the variance was more than 10%. For the police department, we've spent just slightly over budget for the year so far. And primarily we did buy the one Chevy Silverado in March. So that is really pushing us above budget right there. And we paid for 2 of those so far this year. The other cruiser or Silverado was paid for out of the capital fund, which is further down.
And the prices on both of those, even though we allocated
55.
one for, I think, each year, we under budgeted or the prices went up, however you want to look at it. I think it was both, probably.
Yeah.
You know, we kept in whatever we had in
Yeah.
from previous years, and the prices coming in higher.
It's showing lower now, but that's because they're not outfitted. So there will be,
Correct. And I just got those, the prices were updated, and as you can see in the report, bid for council, we're gonna be about $25,000 shy and get both those on the road.
Yeah, $25,000 total.
For both cars, yes. So we're gonna be short. We didn't budget, we should have budgeted an additional 25,000. For the updating and cost of the car.
per car or that's,
Total.
That's for both.
thank you.
About 10 or 12 each.
Yeah, it's right around 12,000. It was, I want to say right around a $6,000 increase on the car itself, and the updating cost went up. And then when we got even checking, the Tahoes were more than Silverados this year. And the Explorers are going to be as more as well, but we couldn't get them in.
Moving on down through the expenses, we have just barely surpassed our budget for the 3 months in the streets department. So we're a little high there. Up on page 8, we're significantly high in the total other government department, and that's primarily due to the fees taken out by the county when they distribute the tax settlement. We received our first half tax settlement in March, and that I should have commented when I was discussing revenues, but we received roughly 240,000 in real estate tax and approximately 71,000 in TIF revenues for the Sunbury Mills Plaza TIF. And we're starting to see some money come in on the special assessments for the sewer sewer line as well.
Little Walnut Creek
Yep.
over there.
Little Walnut
It's two
Creek.
developments.
Yes,
right?
thank
Okay.
you. One other thing I want to mention is the interest income that we've received. Sorry, I keep going back and forth between revenues and expenses, but we've collected approximately 85,000 from Star Ohio just in Q1 this year. In 3 months, $85,000. They're paying close to 4.8% right now in interest. I don't expect that to continue, but we're reaping the benefits of that right now. So
For comparison, it's typically 20,000 a month last year. the year
typically,
before.
yeah, and I think this time last year, their interest rate was around 3%. So it's gone up quite a bit. But
First 3 months, I should say, it was normally 20,000.
right,
This is 85,000.
right. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, but I also want to mention that I would like to begin a new process for our monthly finance meetings. The auditors have mentioned that it's a best practice to have the monthly financials approved via resolution or just a vote in monthly finance committee meetings. She didn't really go into detail on how this should be done, just a general, do you agree with the financials? Do we want to agree with how they are presented, yay or nay, that type of vote. And this would just be for documenting for the public that council has reviewed the financials and agrees with what's being presented. So I'm not sure the best way to go about doing that, but
If we approve the minutes at the next meeting, we basically have approved what was presented to us in that regard. So does that not cover the base?
I think she wanted more of a approval of the financials themselves. Yeah.
See what other municipalities are doing.
Yeah.
It seems like overkill to me. I mean, it seems like and then what are we really attesting to that? Like just the information on the page is what?
Yeah.
Not, I mean,
I can get some more information.
okay.
Mhm.
One thing we talked about, Dana, was the sewer fund. It was over budget by 263,000,
Yes,
but
back on page 10.
that's being made up more so, even more than that, because of the 33 taps that we've received, 8,700 per tap.
Right.
Roughly on that. So that's made up the difference. So it's not turning into a problem.
Correct. So we're over budget on the expense and also over budget on the revenue. So it works itself out, and the revenue over budget is significantly more significant than the expense overage. Just to briefly touch on my bank to book reconciliation, this is on page 17.
My alarm clock. I just got shivers at my side.
Page 17, bank to book reconciliation for March. Total of all bank accounts totals $18,047,456. 20,000 in outstanding checks, which are listed over there to the right. Book balance of $18,043,525, giving us a variance of $16,515. And the variance is broken down by various sewer payment timing variances, payroll deductions not yet remitted, which is a timing issue, and that unidentified, now identified to be the write-off amount of the variance of $682.92. That's all I have on my financials.
Okay.
Are there any questions?
Any questions for Ms. Stefan? Okay, let's move on to unfinished business. And I think we still have Ms. Stefan here for the debt management and cash reserve policy.
Great. Okay, I'd like to discuss the cash reserve policy first, if that's okay. This is the simpler one, in my opinion. As was mentioned, first of all, let's get you to the right page. This would start on page 25. So the cash reserve policy is not going to be presented tonight at council as for a resolution for your consideration. Daryl and I had discussed some adjustments to the policy that we'd like to talk with you about tonight, just so that we're all on the same page. So just a brief recap, the cash reserve policy is setting a minimum balance in the general fund based on 28% of our operating expenses for the year. It also discusses policies and procedures, a financial action plan to follow if we were to go below those thresholds. On page, sorry, Amber, I'm going to give you a better way to put these together next time. I didn't tell you how to put them together. So that's why there's a lot of flipping around. So that's my fault. On page 15, sorry about that. I have put together a spreadsheet which shows all the general fund at the top and some of the other funds, but let's start with the general fund at the top. I have the beginning balance as of the beginning of the year, 6.6 million. You all see that?
Yes.
Okay. When we have anticipated revenue, this is what was budgeted for revenues, 5.1 million. And then we've appropriated 5.5 million, which leaves us with an anticipated fund balance of 6,171,505. And that's simply A plus B minus C. You can do that calculation. 28% of that operating expense equals $1,567,194.88. I went through January and February and March, the unencumbered fund balance in the general fund, and compared the percentage of where we stood with the 28%. And as you can see, we are at 68%, 74%, and 80% in those 3 months, respectively. So we are pretty well set to follow this 28% threshold. Any questions on how I got those numbers or calculations? Okay, basically that's what the cash reserve policy is. Says if we were to go below that 28%, follow step 1, step 2, step 3 if necessary to get us back in shape. There's another policy for the other funds. Down here below the general fund, we got street fund, state highway fund, cemetery, parks and rec, sewer, and capital projects fund. According to how we've written the cash policy, 50% of the known outstanding debt that will be paid in the subsequent year should be kept on hand. And so knowing what the annual debt service is for each of these funds, that's listed in that column there in yellow. 50% of those balances is calculated directly beneath that. And again, I've checked that 50% with the actual fund balance in January, February, and March for each of those funds. And the true just represents, are we greater than 50% of the anticipated payment for next year?
Okay.
Does all that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So basically that's the cash reserve policy in a nutshell. And this is what I would anticipate to present whenever we analyze the funds on a monthly basis to make sure that we're in line with our policy.
And I'll just add that on packet page 26, there are a couple of notes in the right-hand column. These are, I just want to make sure we bring to the attention of the council. The first one has to do with capital purchases. I think we need to clean that up a little bit. Sounds like we, again, are trying to make these purchases out of the capital account, not the general fund. So we'll clean up the language there. But maybe the more relevant point for this group is that under step 2, if we were to fall below 20%, it's written that all non-union wages may be frozen and a request for wage concessions from its union employees may be considered. That may be extreme. And so I think we kind of want to get a sense of, and not that we need the answer today, but I think, maybe that's not where you would want to go. Maybe, again, we've negotiated in good faith with the unions in terms of setting a price. Maybe that's not a strategy you would want to consider. But so again, just bring that to your attention, maybe think a little bit about that. And we can adjust that before we present it more formally. All right. And then the debt.
Okay. Any questions before I move on to the debt policy?
in general, historically, we've never had this, either of these two projected policies, right?
That's correct. These would be new for the city.
Can you, I'm the only one that doesn't get this, and I'm gonna take like 1 minute to make sure I do. The example on 101 general fund, where the 28% here, can we walk through one more time to just show us how we're doing today relative to the proposed policy?
What page are you? pointing
This is
at?
on page 15, general fund 101.
Right at the top.
I'm following 100% this time, I promise.
Okay, so starting in column A, we have the beginning fund balance.
Got it.
And that's what we had at the beginning of January in the general fund.
Okay.
Column B is what we anticipated for revenue. So that's income tax, property taxes, various other sources of revenue in the general fund. Column C is the appropriations that we've budgeted for the year. And column D is the anticipated fund balance, which is just taking the beginning balance, adding in column B, subtracting column C to get where we would end up if column B and C held true. 28% of that. So column D is basically our operating expenses for the year, or where we would end up.
Right.
I'm sorry,
Ending
28% is the appropriations. I said that incorrectly. So that 28% would be of the appropriation number, the expenses that we have, not of the ending balance
28%
of 5.5, column C, yes.
So we're gonna spend 470,000 more than we're gonna take in?
That is what it shows on paper, yes.
Okay.
Just based on budget. Now, actual revenues will be higher than what we've anticipated. So I don't expect that we'll be running in a deficit.
Okay.
And typically we don't, we may have to do another appropriation, but typically year over year, what we appropriate, we do not always spend, I guess is what I'm trying to say. Police cruiser, for example, like what we appropriated that last year and we're appropriating it this year.
It rolled over essentially. Another thing to keep in mind is when you budget your revenues for the year, you don't necessarily have to budget the increases that you're seeing in your revenues. You do have to budget and run through the county, the appropriation changes. So the expenses that you expect, those have to be approved by the county, but the revenues do not. Unless, of course, you need to appropriate more than your revenue source, then you need to show that you do expect to receive more in revenues. Okay, so we have 28% is the 1,567,000. And January and February and March, those columns following, that's the fund balance as of those month ends. So in January, for example, we were at $3,828,003.42 for our general fund balance. That's actual fund balance based on what we had at the beginning of January, actual receipts added in, actual expenses taken out. That 3.28 is where we were. And that is 68% of the operating. So we're way more than 28% of where we would be at a minimum.
And a question then on that 28%, maybe I missed this. Why did you choose 28%?
It was the best practice.
Benchmark. It's the best practice in this particular municipality industry.
Yes. For the general fund, yes, best practice, which equates to about 3 months worth of expense.
I see. Okay.
Historically, recently, has there been any time where you can come close to 28%?
No.
Yeah.
Putting this policy in might not seem like it's even necessary, given the strength of our fund balance. But it's again, a good practice to have when we go for a bond rating. This will look highly in our favor to have something like this in place.
I think it's great.
And I think where this like goes next is, I'm looking at the inverse of the last three columns. So 131, 228, 331. When I mean the inverse, I mean, ultimately, like we're trying to put our money to work, right? We're trying to put the part that's in a low yield checking savings account, right? Into an investment vehicle.
Mhm.
And like, when I say the inverse, what I was doing is I was taking the 3.8 million and just like subtracting out the 40% of the fund balance. I mean, more or less, it says we have like $1.5 million or thereabout to put into some sort of investment tool, as opposed to letting it just sit in a checking account.
Mhm.
Without going below the 28% threshold. That generally. Sorry, I took so long to get that. I'm ready now.
Okay,
Great, thank you.
you're welcome. And then debt policy.
Yes.
Starts on page 18. So the debt policy is another policy that we would like to put in place to establish parameters and guidelines governing the management, evaluation, or reporting on debt obligations. We have the most important part of this whole policy is the addendum, or at least the meat and potatoes of it is in the addendum on page 23. The direct debt limit. We have the city's assessed value of from 2022, $230 million. Calculating the voted allowable maximum and the unvoted maximum allowable. Outstanding unvoted GO debt, which is $782,587. This is, I have a breakdown of this, which includes various bonds that have been put into place since 2003. Kintner Parkway Assessment Bond, Streetscape Bond, Granville Bridge, American Showa TIF, Sunbury Plaza TIF, and Parkland. All of that debt is making up that $782,000 for unvoted general obligation debt. And that is exempt from the limit because the source of the repayments of that is defined as something specific. So in this case, TIF revenues or income taxes. So those bonds are not subject to the limitation. And there's also an indirect debt limit below, which is basically the 10 mil limitation for the maximum aggregate of all the properties that can be assessed. It's a lot of numbers.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I will add, yeah, it's, that one is more complicated. I agree with that. We did have a conversation, Steve, Dana, and myself with the city's municipal advisor, walk through the debt policy again, one more time, just to make sure we were understanding it. I mean, I feel more comfortable now having walked through it with the financial advisor. We did, or the municipal advisor. We did add an overlapping jurisdictions table. It references that these overlapping jurisdictions could impact the amount of money that the city could borrow. So we included the table and gave you a sense of what of who they are and how much millage is available. That's the item that Dana just referenced. We did add explicit language that any financing through the Ohio Water Development Authority, the Ohio Public Works Commission, those types of sources do not count against the debt limit. And that sounds like that's pretty consistent in terms of a best practices debt policy. And we did make an adjustment in the long-term financing threshold. The original draft said anything that was over, anything less than $5 million would be financed under a short-term bond. That was just a threshold that was too high for our municipality. So we've adjusted that down to $2 million. So again, I think that's more in line with what we would expect here in Sunbury. So those are other adjustments that have been made since the last time you saw this document.
Hey, can you just tell us how great we're doing? Let's see, make me feel like, are we doing something wrong?
I can tell you're all jumping for joy and excitement when I get through the debt policy. We're doing great. We have lots of capacity to borrow, and we're very strong financially. Great position to invest lots of extra cash and take advantage of these yields that we can see in the future.
Current debt to revenue ratio is still 7-8%.
Yeah, quite low. I haven't calculated it. I can't remember what the exact number is. I remember it being right around 8%.
Average municipalities 20, 24.
25.
Yeah.
Is average.
Okay, so next steps, you'll likely be coming to us again to pass these.
A resolution next
Next
council
council
meeting,
meeting.
May 3rd, I believe it is.
It'll go through the pre-reading process, so there won't be action. So if you got additional questions, we'll be able to react to those.
Very good.
Yep, that's all I have. Thank you.
Any further questions for Ms. Steppen? Thank you, Dana. That is all we have on the agenda.
Motion
Any
to
other
adjourn.
motion from Mr. Martin and a second from Mr. Knapp? Further discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Martin,
Yes.
Mr. Neff,
Yes.
Mrs. Cooper? Yes. Mr. Capel,
Yes.
Mr. Ghost,
Yes,
Mr. Grumney,
Yes.
Mayor St. John,
Yes.
7 yeas, we're adjourned.
motion adjourned. Meeting adjourned, sorry.